Some strategies for dealing with entrants to the market are not legal. Let's consider some of them. Probably the central one is what is called predatory pricing. That idea, at least under Canadian law, is defined as reducing prices below average cost. So in other words, the firm is losing money on what it's selling in order to drive new entrants out of the market. Because if the firm reduces its prices by enough, presumably new entrants are going to have to match those prices, and they will face losses and will eventually have to leave the market. Economists have some problems with this idea. Obviously, the firm that is carrying out this predatory pricing is going to be experiencing losses. So is that really a good strategy? For example, what if new firms keep trying to enter the market in response to the profits that would be there if the predatory pricing is not being carried out? The firm would then have to cut its prices again and keep sustaining losses. So is that really something that's going to work? Aside from the fact that it is illegal, as I mentioned. Well, perhaps something resembling predatory pricing could still work and might even be legal. Let's consider a possibility. Suppose that new entrants to the market faced higher costs. Earlier, I mentioned the idea of an experience curve or a learning curve where firms that are in the market and have experience in producing the product could enjoy lower costs. If that were the case, then new entrants to the market already face higher costs. Now, perhaps they could still enter and find some little niche in the market where they could survive, but if the existing firm, what I'm calling the incumbent firm here, was able to reduce its prices so that new entrants would face perhaps even larger losses, the incumbent firm could do that and still enjoy profits. So it could reduce prices, but not to the level that is defined as predatory pricing, that is, pricing below average cost. Your text, by the way, defines predatory pricing as setting prices below marginal cost. I'm sticking with the definition in Canadian law. There are other reasons, by the way, about why the incumbent firm could have lower costs. It might be a large firm, for example. It might get good prices from its suppliers because of its negotiating power, an idea that we're going to look at in the near future. So this sort of thing is something that could be done legally and could discourage new entrants from coming into the market. It could be that the firm could carry out predatory pricing, and if it was a large firm and had what are often called deep pockets, in other words, it has a lot of financial resources, it might be able to wait out some sort of price war with new firms, especially if those new firms were relatively small. And that could be combined with the next idea that perhaps predatory pricing, even though it involves losses in the short term, might still be something that would be worth doing. You could establish a reputation as being very aggressive in response to new firms. And so even though you might experience some losses, it might discourage new entrants from even trying to enter the market, anticipating that you were going to be very aggressive and drive them out of the market. They might feel it simply wasn't worth trying. A few years ago, for example, someone tried to start up a local newspaper in the town of Woodstock in New Brunswick. And the company called Brunswick News, owned by the Irving conglomerate, quickly crushed it. And I don't think anybody would attempt to start a community newspaper in New Brunswick after observing that experience. There are some other strategies mentioned in your text. Let's consider those. One is the idea that a firm could try to raise rival firms' costs. So, for example, if the firm that we're thinking about was part of some larger organization, let's say a vertically integrated organization that sold an important input to rival firms, and it had the power to raise that price, it could raise the rival firm's costs and perhaps drive them out of business. So, for example, suppose that the firm that we're thinking about is, let's say, a construction company, and it's part of an organization that owns the only local source of cement, which is an important input in the construction of buildings. So, if it controlled the local source of cement, and if it raised the price of cement to rival construction companies, then that would put the construction company in a very good competitive position. Now, that sort of behavior is illegal. And in Canadian law, this is what's called abuse of dominant position. So I've just taken an extract from the Canadian law, which is called the Competition Act. And it says that a dominant firm in a market or a dominant group of firms engages in conduct that is intended to eliminate or discipline a competitor or to deter future entry by new competitors, with the result that competition is prevented or lessened substantially. Well, that kind of behavior is called abuse of dominant position, and that's not legal. So the purpose of this competition law is, in fact, to prevent the kind of strategies we're thinking about here of keeping new entrants out of the market. So obviously the law is there to protect consumers, to protect buyers, and to make it difficult for firms to dominate markets. This is why I said at the beginning that really there's not too much firms can do to keep competitors out. Their best strategies are those that involve minimizing the damage that new competition is going to cause. Of course, competition laws vary from country to country, so it's important to be aware of just what the law is in the place where you're doing business. And it's also important to know how well that law is enforced. Well, that's about all I've got to say about the threat of new entrants into the market.